I'm Jada. I'm Jacob. I'm Joy. I'm Jamie. I'm Julie. I'm Jasmine.
I'm Jedi. I'm Jackson.
I'm Jet.
I'm Jenny.
I'm Jeremiah.
I'm Jessica.
I'm Brenda.
I'm Toby.
And we are the Willis Clan.
Toby and Brenda Willis and their 12 children were known around the country as a musically gifted, beautiful family with traditional values. The children were homeschooled and home churched, and starting at a young age, they were taught how to dance, sing, and play various instruments. And they went on to form a family band. They started playing in local pubs, and it didn't take long for them to make a name for themselves around their community and eventually the country. The kids made a great impression wherever they played, leaving fans impressed with how disciplined and talented they were at such a young age. Eventually, they caught the attention of network executives at the Great American Country Network. This led to their first venture into reality TV on their show, The Willis Clan. The show was short-lived, only lasting one season, but this didn't stop the Willises from continuing their pursuit to celebrity status. They continued to play gigs around the country, even landing a spot on America's Got Talent where they made it to the quarterfinals. And while they didn't win, they did catch the eye of executives at TLC, and once again they were given another chance at a reality TV show. The Willis family aired for the first time on TLC in May of 2015, and it was an instant hit. With the recent cancellation of 19 Kids and Counting starring the Duggar family, fans seem to have found a solid replacement. However, this show would also be short-lived, but this time it ended in the worst way possible. This family that seemed to have it all had actually been living a total nightmare behind the scenes. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Summer Sanchez, and on this channel we talk about crime, cults, and heinous history. So if that sounds interesting to you, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. So today's video is all about the Willis family, and I want to know if you had ever heard of the Willises before. Like I mentioned in the intro, they were on TV, they were on America's Got Talent, but somehow I had never heard of them until I stumbled upon a book called Unspeakable: Surviving My Childhood and Finding My Voice by Jessica Willis Fisher. Jessica is a person that we'll be talking about a lot in today's video. She is the oldest of the 12 kids, and a lot of the information I have on this case came from her book. She is a victim in this case. There are other victims, which we will get into some, but most of what I know comes from Jessica's point of view, so that's why she will be discussed so much. So throughout the video, just keep in mind that while I'm focusing on Jessica's story, the same sort of stuff was happening all throughout this family. This family was ran like a cult, with the dad, Toby Willis, at the center. Everyone was under his control, everyone was under his authority. And unfortunately, this is another example of a fundamentalist cult-like family being given a platform on TLC. And that's what we're talking about today. But before we get into the case, let's go ahead and briefly talk about today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by June's Journey. June's Journey is a free-to-play hidden object murder mystery game where you collect clues by finding the objects in each scene. You play as Detective June Parker, and in the opening of the game, June travels back to her childhood home in New York when she hears about the mysterious death of her sister. I'm not going to give too much away because there is a lot to this story, but basically, as soon as June arrives in New York, she knows that things aren't really as clear-cut as they seem, and she realizes that she needs to figure out what really happened to her sister. As you work through the levels and find the hidden objects, you'll unlock clues and cutscenes that will reveal more and more of the story. You'll meet lots of characters throughout the game, and each character plays a part in helping you to unravel the mystery. And lots of family secrets will be revealed along the way as well. The storyline is exciting and interesting, and on top of all of that, June's Journey is a beautifully designed game. Each level is super detailed, and the art style is absolutely beautiful. One of the things that I love most about this game is that it's set back in the 1920s. I love vintage aesthetic, and you can tell that the developers put a lot of time and effort into bringing that time period to life. In addition to solving a murder, you'll also get to customize your island and decorate your mansion. There are lots of ways to customize. You can add flowers, fountains, fences, vineyards, like complete new structures and more. And June's Journey also has a very dedicated community of players, and there are tons of in-game events, so you're not going to get bored. There's always something going on. And if you don't want to play alone, you can join a club and participate in competitions. I play June's Journey when I'm bored, when I want to relax, when I'm feeling anxious. If you've been watching me for a while, you know how much I love June's Journey. I've been playing this game for years, and I was so happy the first time they reached out about sponsoring my channel. And you can click the link in my description box or scan the QR code on the screen to download June's Journey for free. June's Journey is available on Android and iOS mobile devices, as well as PC through Facebook Games. A big thank you to June's Journey for sponsoring this video, and now let's get into the case. By the way, during this video, if y'all see anything in my lap, it is my dog Clover. This is Clover. She's one of 4 dachshunds that I have, and they're all very, very needy. She needs me to hold her right now, apparently. So if you see anything on my lap, it's Clover. Or if you hear snoring, it's Clover. Toby Nathaniel Willis was born on April 29th, 1969, or 1970. I've seen both dates. I'm not really sure which one's correct. He was the second of 9 kids born to Reverend Dwayne Willis and Janet Willis. The family lived in the south side of Chicago, and Toby's dad, Dwayne, was a pastor at a small independent Baptist church. So religion was a huge part of Toby's day-to-day life. So Toby's parents had their first 3 kids, so that's Toby and 2 of his siblings. Then there was like a 9-year gap, and then they had 6 more children in rapid succession, bringing the total up to 9. Toby did well in school, and he was on the high school wrestling team, and this was really where his passion was. Toby started dating a girl named Brenda who was in the grade above him. He was a junior and she was a senior. And Brenda was very intelligent and popular. She was valedictorian of her class. After high school, Brenda went off to college in Florida while Toby finished up his senior year. Toby was awarded a full scholarship to Northwestern University in Illinois, and he competed on the college wrestling team. He had dreams of making wrestling his life. He wanted to eventually compete in the Olympics, and he definitely had the drive and determination to make that happen. But his dream was cut short when he was injured during a match. Something happened during this match, and Toby was suddenly paralyzed. He did go on to make a full recovery, but this pretty much ended his dreams of becoming an Olympic wrestler. He suffered from chronic neck and back pain after that. He had to have several surgeries, but this interest in wrestling does come back up later in the case. Toby graduated from Northwestern University, and he got a job in the computer programming field. He and Brenda got married in 1991, and they settled into a little house in Chicago. And right away, Toby and Brenda chose to start a family and live a very traditional lifestyle, with the man going out to make the money and the woman dedicating her life to taking care of the home and the kids and her husband. And their plan was to just have as many children as God was willing to give them, just like his parents had. They would go on to have 12 kids, 8 girls and 4 boys. They had their first child, Jessica, in 1992, and after that, it was just like one right after another. They had a son named Jeremiah just 11 months after Jessica was born, and then they had another daughter named Jennifer in 1995. And it was during Brenda's pregnancy with her 3rd child, Jennifer, that an absolutely devastating tragedy happened. On the morning of November 8th, 1994, Toby's parents, Dwayne and Janet, were driving the family van down Highway I-94 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. In the van with them that day were their 6 children. So remember, they had Toby and 2 other kids, and then they had that 9-year gap and then 6 more kids. Well, the children who were in the van that day with them were their 6 youngest kids. The children were 13-year-old Ben, 11-year-old Joe, 9-year-old Sam, 7-year-old Hank, 3-year-old Elizabeth, and 6-week-old Peter. As the family was traveling down the highway, a piece of metal that had fallen from a big rig truck was just lying in the middle of the road. By the time Dwayne noticed, it was too late for him to do anything about it. He didn't have time to swerve, and the van ended up hitting the metal, causing the van to spin out of control, and the gas tank exploded. The van went up in flames. Dwayne, Janet, and their 13-year-old son Ben managed to pull themselves out of the burning vehicle, and they were literally on fire. Some motorists stopped to help out, and they were pulling the shirts off their backs to help put out the flames on Janet, Ben, and Dwayne, and the 3 of them were rushed to the hospital. But sadly, the other 5 children died before anyone could get to them. Janet and Dwayne had some 2nd and 3rd degree burns, but Ben had severe 3rd degree burns covering 90% of his body. Janet and Dwayne did make a full recovery, but Ben's injuries were just too severe, and he passed away just a day after the crash. So within a matter of 24 hours, Janet and Dwayne Willis had lost 6 of their children. Now, as you can imagine, this made national news.
When we hit the object, the rear exploded, taking the car out of control. The fire was around us even before the van stopped sliding, and I was yelling to get out of the car.
People could not imagine the nightmare that Janet and Dwayne were living, having to grieve 6 children all at once. But the family held strong to their faith. Dwayne Willis said, "We believe children are a heritage of the Lord. We thank God for 6 precious children, 4 rascally boys, a sweet girl, so much like her mother, and a little baby just beginning to smile and grow. We understood that they were given of the Lord, and we understood they weren't ours. They were His, and we were stewards of those children. And so God took them back. He is the giver and taker of life." And some people, especially deeply religious people, they found this story so inspirational that this family was able to stay so positive and faithful after having to deal with this horrific tragedy. But as time went on, more details about the crash started to emerge. An investigation revealed that the piece of metal had fallen from a big rig truck driving just a few cars ahead of the Willises. And that truck driver had been involved in a bribery scandal in order to obtain his truck driving license illegally. This in turn exposed corruption involving the then Secretary of State George Ryan, who by the time all this came out was now the governor of the state of Illinois. Several members of George Ryan's staff were convicted of illegally selling government licenses and contracts to several employees of the state, and one of those state employees was a man named Ricardo Guzman. Instead of taking the mandatory test needed to obtain a valid, legal truck driving license, Ricardo secretly paid members of the Secretary of State's office to obtain one illegally. And this revelation resulted in a major lawsuit, and in 1999, Reverend Dwayne Willis and Janet Willis were awarded a massive payout of $100 million.
It was learned the truck driver whose rig lost that piece of metal had bribed a state worker for his license. The resulting federal investigation and cover-up sent dozens of state employees to jail, including former Illinois Governor George Ryan.
I'm thankful to all the people of the city of Chicago and all people who have been so good to Janet and me.
5 years after the crash, the Willises won a $100 million out-of-court settlement.
Dwayne and Janet gave their 3 surviving adult children each a portion of the settlement. I don't know how much they gave each of the children exactly. I've seen $10 million mentioned in the research, but I don't know if that's accurate. Whatever the amount though, it was enough to completely change Toby and Brenda's life. By this point in 1999, they already had 6 children. So they had Jessica, Jeremiah, Jennifer, Jeanette, Jackson, and Jedediah. Toby quit his computer programming job, and he and Brenda and the 6 children packed up and they moved to Ashland City, Tennessee, which is about a 30-minute drive from Nashville. They found a house on this giant piece of property in the hills of Ashland, and this house was huge. It was 9,000 square feet, and this was all a huge change from what they were used to. You know, they went from living in the city to living in this very secluded house in the hills of Tennessee. And before the family had left Chicago, they had been surrounded by relatives, and they attended Toby's father's church, so they always had other people around. But now they're in this brand new place, they're isolated from everyone, and this is really how the family lived for several years. 6 more kids were born after the move to Tennessee. There was Jasmine, Juliet, Jamie, Joanna, Jager, and the 12th and final child was Jada. The children were all homeschooled, and Toby even started a home church with a few other large families with similar beliefs. So this meant conservative, fundamentalist views, no birth control, no sex before marriage. The girls are under the control of their fathers until they get married, and then once that happened, they would be under the control of their husbands. The children were not to get out of line. They were to serve their father faithfully. The father, Toby, was an extension of God. That's how he came to be viewed. He was like a godlike figure. The men in the church even decided that the women and girls should have minimal chance to speak during service. The girls and women were to just sit there, look pretty, obey, do whatever daddy says, eventually grow up, get married, and make babies. That was a woman's true purpose in life. This was a very strict church setting, very strict household. And the kids were very isolated. They didn't go to school. They didn't go to a traditional church. So they didn't have a lot of opportunities to meet outsiders. So their social interactions were extremely limited. Now, like I said, Toby quit his job when his family was awarded all of that money, and he essentially retired. And so this meant that Toby was around a lot more, which really should have been a good thing, but it wasn't, because Toby was actually a horrible, disgusting human being. He was extremely abusive in every way imaginable. And with him now being home all of the time, that meant that he had all the time in the world to control and terrorize his family. Toby Willis was a very, very sick man, and his pattern of abusive behavior started when his oldest daughter Jessica was only 3 years old. And I do want to add a warning here. I'm not going to get graphic at all. I'm going to be as vague as humanly possible because I don't like talking about this stuff, to be honest, but I do think that it's very important because this happens way too often, especially in these extremely fanatically religious families. And even though I'm going to be very vague, it is still a pretty upsetting topic, so just keep that in mind. So it started with Toby touching Jessica inappropriately, and he would tell her that this is what daddies like mommies to do. Again, she is 3 years old the first time that she remembers this happening. This sort of thing would happen night after night for years. Jessica later said that it must have happened at least 100 times. He would even instruct Jessica to touch herself, while he wasn't even around, and then he would ask her randomly if she had been doing what he told her to do. He would also force Jessica to look at and touch his private areas. And he would reassure Jessica that this was okay because, this was just him teaching her how to please her future husband. Toby would also call Jessica into his room and make her give him like a back massage or a foot massage. And during these massages, he would tell Jessica what a great kisser she was and how she's a much better kisser than her mom. He would also ask Jessica these really weird questions like, if I asked you to marry me, would you? And he would talk bad about Brenda to Jessica. He would call her fat and say things about how having so many children had ruined her body. And he would also force Jessica to participate in photo shoots where he would make her get into poses, and he told her that these photos would be for her future husband to pleasure himself with once her body was also fat and stretched out from having kids. And if Jessica wasn't posing sexy enough, he would instruct her to study lingerie catalogs in order to get ideas on how to pose properly. And everything that I have just told you was happening to Jessica when she was very young. Think like elementary school aged. And keep in mind that this is also happening to other children in the family. And because Jessica was so young and also just very isolated, she has said that she didn't really have the vocabulary to understand exactly what was happening. Like, she knew something bad was going on, but she didn't really know how to express it.
When I was really little, I didn't have words for that. I didn't necessarily know that anything was wrong, and then realizing something was wrong. It was really just maybe my body telling me or something was uncomfortable, but not having the clarity, not understanding.
This was a very confusing situation, and unfortunately, things just got worse. One night, when Jessica was 9 years old, the abuse escalated. So one side of the house that they bought needed a little updating. And so while that was under construction, the kids moved from that side of the house to the other side where Brenda and Toby's room was. And they were sleeping in Toby and Brenda's master suite. They brought little mattresses in for the kids that were kind of like lined up against the wall, and that's where the kids were sleeping. Now, Jessica thought that since all of her siblings were sleeping right next to each other, right next to her, literally in the same room with their mother, that Toby wouldn't do anything to her, because he would be too afraid that he would get caught. But that did not stop Toby. First of all, he continued telling Jessica that, she should touch herself. Like, he would tuck her in and then he would whisper, like, don't forget to do what I told you to do. And then one night, Toby did something that he hadn't before. He waited until everyone was asleep, and then he picked Jessica up from her mattress. He carried her out of the room and into a bathroom, and he assaulted her. Now, while this was happening, one of the other kids woke up and they headed for the bathroom, and this startled Toby, and so he stopped. Over the years, the girls would tell Brenda at least bits and pieces of what was happening. She would confront Toby, there would be a big fight, and he would deny everything, or he would say that he had no recollection of doing that, but if he did, he was sorry. And then things would just keep happening. This cycle happened so often that the situation became like this really dark, open secret within the family. It's like everyone kind of knew, but no one was really talking about it. The girls, like I said, would randomly mention it to Brenda, but they didn't talk to each other about it. Brenda even asked Jessica once when she was very young if Toby was touching her inappropriately, because one of the younger girls had told Brenda that he was doing that to them. Jessica told her yes, but she didn't really go into too much detail. Brenda was extremely upset. She confronted Toby, but he just denied it. So there was a general understanding that these things were happening to Jessica and some, if not all, of the other girls. But it's like everyone just felt powerless to stop it. Now, the kids were kids. There's not much they can do in a situation like this. They were telling Brenda. They did what they were supposed to do. They told an adult, but that's all they could really do. Children rely on the adults to take that information and do something about it, but nothing was ever really done. The kids have all spoken out in support of Brenda after this case broke, and they said that they don't blame her because she was a victim too. Now, in addition to the sexual stuff, Toby was also extremely violent, and he was beating his children and his wife if they ever got out of line. Everyone, including Brenda, was taught that saying no to Toby was not a good idea. They had to do whatever Toby said, no matter what, or there would be major consequences. He would beat his children and his wife with a belt. He would also use a wooden paddle. He even punched them sometimes. He would slap them across the face with the back of his hand, causing them to bleed. There were times when Toby would even have the other children hold down whoever was in trouble so that he could more easily beat them. Toby absolutely ruled that house with an iron fist, and he believed in breaking a child's will as early as possible to show them who was really in charge. There was one time when one of the boys, Jedediah, who they called Jedi, when he was a toddler, he was throwing like a massive tantrum like toddlers tend to do. So Toby alternated between hitting him and putting him inside of a closet. And if Jedi came out and his will was still too strong for Toby's liking, he would hit him again and then throw him back into the closet. This This went on for hours until finally Jedi just gave in, and he was so exhausted by the end of it, he fell asleep. According to Toby, this is what fathers needed to do to keep their kids from going down the wrong path and allowing themselves to give in to the devil. And remember how Toby was on the wrestling team? Well, he would force his sons to wrestle him starting at toddler age. Jessica has said that she remembers being in tears watching her dad pin down her brother Jeremiah when he was 2 or 3 years old. And this was not play fighting. Parents and kids will play fight sometimes. That's not what this was. Not that anyone I know would ever pin down a toddler, but this was definitely not play. Jeremiah would obviously be in distress. He would be crying, but Toby would not let up. So this is a grown man pinning down a crying toddler and putting him into various wrestling holds against his will. He was always asserting his dominance over his family. He took any chance he could to let them know who was actually in charge. He also had this dream that he would have a bunch of sons who he could force into wrestling, and they could live out his dream of becoming an Olympic wrestler. And maybe this was his sadistic way of introducing his sons to the sport. I don't know. Toby even co-founded an organization called RPW, or Real Pro Wrestling. It was a production company that would put on various wrestling events. Now, this business did not last very long. It was only on air for 2 seasons, and it went under in 2007. But when RPW was still up and running, Toby had set up a home office, and he would conduct all of the business out of that office. But he started luring his daughters into the office by telling them that they could skip out on all of their chores for the day if they helped him at work and be his secretary. He would only pick one of the girls at a time, and all they had to do was help out with some filing and organizing, and they would get to skip out on all their other responsibilities. So to the girls, this sounded like a pretty good deal. But part of the deal was that they would be required to wear a mini skirt while they were playing secretary. And he would abuse the girls right there in his office. He would make them sit on his lap, and he would be inappropriately touching them. It was like he was playing some sick kind of role-playing fantasy, but he was doing this with his daughters. Once RPW went under in 2007, Toby turned his focus on using his children for fame and money. The children were all homeschooled, like I said, and as part of their homeschooling, the children were taught to dance and sing and play instruments. They played Irish music, and they competed in various Irish and West Coast swing dance competitions, and they were extremely talented. They started out by performing in pubs around the Nashville area, but word started to spread about this big, talented family of dancers and singers, and more opportunities started to open up. They started performing internationally. They went to Ireland several times. They performed at the Grand Ole Opry several times. Jessica became the lead singer and songwriter for the band when the other siblings did backup vocals and played instruments. And the youngest of the group would come on stage and do cute little dances while their older siblings were playing. Toby had a studio set up on the property, and the kids would practice multiple hours per day. And knowing what we know about Toby, he was not going to settle for anything less than perfect. He was extremely hard on the children. He would have the children in tears during rehearsals. He would be yelling, calling them names. Sometimes he would throw things at them. One time, Jessica was practicing her fiddle, and she wasn't playing up to Toby's standards, and so he grabbed an object and threw it at her face. Thankfully, she did manage to dodge it, but as she was moving out of the way, she broke her fiddle. But this kind of thing happened all the time. There was a lot of pressure on these kids, and if they didn't do everything perfectly to Toby's standards, they knew they were in trouble. This was not a loving, supportive environment. And knowing this, it's very frustrating when you watch clips from their TLC show, because Toby tries to act like he doesn't get bothered by anything. He lets the kids figure things out for themselves. He's just there for support, but that could not be farther from the truth.
Actually, I don't mind if they tell me what to do, just as long as they're doing something. Ultimately, I just want to be a yes man where I'm just rubber stamping everything. They get to live their lives, and that's the holy grail, which we've never gotten to, but we're trying.
The kids were also forced to work out every day, and they would be forced to run, and Toby would time them while they ran. He would also force the kids to weigh in so he could keep a close eye on their weight. And if he thought they weighed more than they should, he would call them fat. He would ridicule them in front of the other kids. When Jessica was in her early teens, Toby actually put her on a diet. And Toby didn't like the way that Jessica ran for some reason, and so he would force her to run back and forth in their yard. And their yard is big, okay? This is not like a normal yard. Remember, they live on 180 acres. So he would force Jessica to just run back and forth. And the entire time she was running, he would be mocking her, calling her names right in front of the other kids. He would sometimes even run behind her, and he would kick at her heels if she was running too slowly. No one wanted to be that person in the family, the one that Toby was making fun of. And so all the kids just tried to do whatever they could to please him at all times so that they could stay on his good side. And the children didn't have any outlets, like social outlets outside of the home and outside of their band. They weren't really allowed to have friends. Toby thought that it was a waste of time for them to form relationships with people who weren't exactly like they were, who didn't live up to his standards. He genuinely believed that he was the smartest person in every room and that his family was better than every other family. So the only other people they were allowed to hang out with had to be Toby approved. And so this meant they had to have the same beliefs and the same values that he had. This greatly limited their social interactions. This was even the case as the kids became adults. Jessica did not get her first cell phone until she was 23 years old. Can you imagine being 23 years old? You are traveling the world, performing concerts, you're on TV shows, you've got all of this pressure and responsibility, but you are just now allowed to have a cell phone. But if Jessica did something to upset Toby, he would confiscate her cell phone. Like, she would get grounded from her phone. Again, she is 23 years old. She is a grown woman. And while all of this abuse and sinister stuff was going on at home, the children were still expected to perform perfectly at every show. And they did. And as time went on, Toby became more and more unhinged, especially when it came to religion. He became obsessed with the apocalypse, which isn't surprising to me whatsoever. How many times have you guys heard me say that about these narcissistic cult leader types? This is kind of like textbook. Toby told the children that they needed to look for signs of the coming apocalypse and they needed to prepare. They started stockpiling food and weapons, and not just any weapons either. They had multiple assault rifles. Some even had silencers. He would also always be talking about what happened at Ruby Ridge, and he would compare their family to the Weaver family. And if you don't know about Ruby Ridge, it was a standoff that lasted 11 days between the Weaver family and the authorities in Idaho. This happened back in 1992 on the Weaver family property in Ruby Ridge, and it ended in 3 deaths. Randy Weaver was a self-described white separatist, and he had been attending meetings of the Aryan Nation. During one of these meetings, he sold 2 illegal firearms to an undercover ATF agent. Randy was supposed to appear in court, and he failed to appear, so a warrant was put out for his arrest.
You see, Weaver was wanted on a federal firearm charge. He sold 2 sawed-off shotguns to a federal informant who was looking for information about the Aryan Nation based nearby in Idaho's Panhandle. Weaver refused to show up in court. U.S. Marshal agents made a series of attempts to have Weaver surrender, but Weaver refused to leave his cabin. That's when things escalated, with more federal agents and hundreds of Weaver supporters converging on Ruby Ridge. Shots were fired, and it didn't take long to see what had just happened.
Really, within 15 minutes, Vicki Weaver would be dead, and Kevin Harris would be shot, and the entire thing, which should have been easily settled, would just simply blow up.
There's a lot more to that story. That's like a super condensed summary. There are a lot of opinions on who was at fault, but Toby was always bringing up Ruby Ridge, and he would use that incident as a way to make the children afraid of the authorities. Toby would also pit the children against each other. He would tell them to watch over one another to make sure everyone was doing what they were supposed to be doing. And if anyone got out of line, he encouraged them to hit one another. And he would encourage the children to go and tell on the others for breaking any of the rules. So this naturally caused distrust between the kids. This put a barrier between each of them. This is probably why none of the girls were talking to each other about the abuse they were suffering at Toby's hands. This kept Toby in the know about everything, and it kept every person in that house loyal to him above anyone else. In 2011, GAC, or Great American Country, contacted the Willis family about doing a reality show. By this point, the family had garnered a lot of attention in the music industry, and you add to that the fact that this is a large, super religious family, and the executives thought that this might be an interesting show.
We decided before we got married we were going to shoot for 12 kids. I didn't know what I was getting into.
Coming this June, A Family with Talent times 12. GAC's all-new series, The Willis Clan.
Toby and Brenda Willis, thank you for letting us in your home and being a part of this new Willis Clan show that's going to be on GAC. With 12 kids, how do they all get along so well, Brenda, Toby?
I think the big thing is that Toby is a strong head of the household and disciplinarian, and so they don't get away with anything.
Where the wrestling part comes in, we're gonna see a little bit of that in just a little while. The guys are gonna take us down into the workout area. Toby, you as the head of the household, I mean, you use words like accomplished and maximum effort, you know, to help your kids. Where do you find that balance of, okay, I'm gonna push them here and I'm gonna pull back on here?
Well, I don't always get it right. and you just have to adjust. But kids don't know what they want. You know, when they're young, they really don't know what they want. And a lot of parents, you know, ask a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old what they want. And the fact is, a 3 and 5-year-old would probably just want a hot dog, and you know, they don't know any differently. And so, you know, parents have to step in and push them, and it's a fine line, you know. But kids are very forgiving. You push them too much, you can back off a little bit. They know that you know, parents love them, and when they see the effort that goes in, they can overcome our mistakes and so on.
The show was not renewed for a second season, but this was not the end of their reality TV career. In 2014, the family competed on America's Got Talent, and they managed to make it all the way to the quarterfinals. This appearance led to the start of their second reality TV show. In 2015, TLC, the Learning Channel, the channel that seems to have little to no standards or screening processes, offered the Willises their own TV show. The show would be called The Willis Family, and it would follow the day-to-day lives of this large Christian family of musicians. And with the imminent downfall of 19 Kids and Counting, the network probably thought that this would be a good replacement.
Story about a family who could become the new Duggars, huh?
Yeah, absolutely, but hopefully without the scandal. That's the
that
plan.
would be good.
Anyway, they are the Willis family, and there are a lot of them. They sing, they dance, they have their own TLC show, and they seem like a bucket full of down-home, wholesome goodness. Their brand is building. They have 3 albums and just wrapped up the first season of their TLC reality show. Their big break came last year on America's Got Talent.
There's no premarital sex, and they do not drink alcohol, but at the same time, the kids talk about their parents being pretty lenient.
One significant thing that I haven't mentioned yet was that the Willis house actually burned down back in 2004. That big house that they bought when they first moved to Tennessee, it burned down. Thankfully, no one was in the home at the time, but it was a total loss. The family would spend several years moving from one rental property to the next, even living out of their tour bus at times, waiting for the litigation with the insurance company to come to an end. And once the family was finally ready to rebuild, Toby started making plans to turn his property into what can only be described as a compound. There's a scene in the show where Toby has contractors out at the property, and he's talking about his plan to divide up the land between all 12 of his kids and him and Brenda. He and Brenda would have their home, then each kid would be able to build on their own plot of land. There would also be like a common house where they could record music and have rehearsals and stuff. Toby was making it to where his children and his children's children would never leave. They would basically be trapped on that property, cut off from outsiders, and they could never leave him.
Let me give you a proposal. You guys don't have to answer me now, but you guys should think about it. What I'd like to do is get a surveyor and divide off the land. And you guys literally can each get a plot.
The big idea is to try to help my kids and give them land so they can build houses and still live and work together. And hopefully the surveyor can take the land and divide it up and accomplish, you know, what we need.
What I'm hoping to be able to do is eventually build the public house, or we call it the pub. A lot of people don't know that's where the word pub comes from, but the public house, where everybody would hang out, it's a bigger house. And then build the smaller houses. Maybe 3 right here is what I'm hoping for, and then 4 along there. And the idea is you have this small gated community where all the kids can live. You know, in a sense, the grandkids can all hang out, cousins, whatever, hang out together. And then you have the public house where you have the studios and the workspace and the living space where school would go on and that kind of stuff.
He was setting this compound up so that he could retain control over his kids even throughout their adulthoods. He would remain in control, and he would continue to make a lot of money off of his kids. And this would also give him unlimited access to future grandchildren. And I think that this is actually the main motivation behind him wanting to create this compound. Everyone in this family was quite literally living 2 separate realities. In one reality, they were happy, they were touring, they were playing music all over the country, filming a reality TV show, and putting on these happy masks that their father had carefully crafted for them. Then as soon as the music stopped and the camera stopped rolling, the happy mask came off, and their second, much darker reality began. But there were times when the 2 realities collided. During the filming of season 1 of The Willis Family, one of the main storylines involved the oldest son, Jeremiah, and a love interest named Mary. Now, Mary and her family had moved to Tennessee from, I believe it was Wisconsin, and they joined the little home church that the Willises attended. And Jeremiah and Mary liked each other, and they started up like a courtship. Toby gave Jeremiah permission to start officially dating Mary. They weren't allowed to be overly physical. Of course, premarital sex was completely out of the question, but they could sit together and hold hands and things like that. But yeah, Jeremiah and Mary became a couple, and this became a pretty strong focus in the beginning of season 1 of the show. Jeremiah decided to propose to Mary right after her 18th birthday, but before he did, he asked her father for her hand in marriage. And this was all caught on camera.
I know we've been talking for a while, over email and other, not just in person, but I just wanted to officially ask, do I have your blessing to marry Mary, to ask her to marry me? Because I hope she says yes, but, so, yeah.
Well, I think you know my answer already, Jer. I know I'm a big fan of you, and really happy that you and Mary have fallen in love, and you certainly have my permission to ask her, and my blessing.
Hey, thank you, really.
Yeah.
No, I just have to go, the church actually ask.
So Jeremiah proposes, Mary says yes, they announce their engagement at the next church service, and everything seems okay.
I don't think this is going to be a typical church service. I think we're going to have some extra level of excitement today.
Apparently I'm going to do a presentation this morning on Mariology, and I brought a prop.
But the happiness was short-lived because somehow Mary found out about what Toby was doing to his daughters, and she confronted Jeremiah. This part was, of course, not on the show. This was all happening behind the scenes. So Mary tells Jeremiah that she knows what Toby is doing. Jeremiah panics, and he calls a meeting with some of the older kids, and he also invited his dad and mom to sit in on this meeting. So in this meeting, it's Jessica, Jennifer, Jeanette, Jeremiah, and Brenda and Toby. And he says Mary knows what dad's been doing to the girls. So this meeting right here, it's undeniable proof that this was an open secret within this family. And during this little meeting, Toby is just gaslighting his daughters. He's saying things like, there's nothing to know, right, girls? Nothing's going on. If anyone asks any questions, just tell them they have no proof. If Mary wouldn't have been a part of this reality TV show, if the audience didn't already know about her, he would have just had Jeremiah get rid of her. Like, just dump her and move on. She's not one of us. She's an outsider, blah, blah, blah. And she would have just been gone. But he couldn't do that because the viewers already know about Mary, and she's engaged to Jeremiah, so he's got to figure out what to do. So basically the plan was just tell her nothing's going on, just convince her that nothing's happening. So after this meeting, some time goes by. The Willis family goes on tour for like a month or so. The network ends up flying Mary out to see Jeremiah because she is a part of the show and they want her around. She stays on tour with them for about a week, but behind the scenes things are really tense between Jeremiah and Mary. When the tour is over, Mary invites Jeremiah over and she ends the engagement and she gives him back the ring. She and her family ended up leaving the church. They actually moved states. I'm assuming this was an attempt to get as far away from the situation as possible. If Mary's family knew Toby at all, if he had ever let his true self show when they were around, they might have been afraid of him. And so if you watched the Willis family show back when it was on TLC, you might remember Mary suddenly not being on the show. The family had to address this situation. They knew that there would be a lot of questions. And so the explanation that they gave was that there were just some differences and it just ended up not working out. Toby had managed to ruin one of his children's relationships and he was about to try again, but it would actually lead to his downfall. It all started when Jessica met a man named Sean Fisher. Sean's father, Pete, was a general manager at the Grand Ole Opry where the Willis clan had performed countless times. Toby, who was always interested in making connections with people who could potentially further the band's success, he invited the Fishers over for dinner. And Sean and Jessica had an immediate attraction. And at first, Toby was sort of okay with the idea of the two of them dating, probably because of who Sean's father was, but it had to be on Toby's terms. rules. Any outsider that came into his family, that person had to adhere to Toby's rules, to his beliefs. Everyone had to conform to what he wanted them to be. And if they wouldn't do that, they were out. This meant that Jessica and Sean could not consider themselves boyfriend and girlfriend until Toby said it was okay. They would need to be chaperoned. No physical stuff at all could happen between the two of them. Sean needed to adhere to the Willis family's religious beliefs and all of their rules. And at this point, when Jessica met Sean, she is in her early 20s. I believe she's 21. But Toby still has a very, very strong hold over every aspect of her life. She can't even go out on a date with a man without permission from her father. And Sean's family were not like the Willis family. They did not have the same rules for their kids or the same extreme beliefs. But because Sean liked Jessica so much, he was willing to do whatever he had to do to be with her. So at first, he did try to do things that he thought might make Toby accept him. He started attending their church. He would stop by for visits. At first, things were okay, but it took a turn pretty quickly. I think Toby saw that Jessica and Sean were getting a little too close, and so he told her that they needed to stop seeing each other. The story was that some of the people at their church were complaining that Sean and Jessica were setting a bad example for the younger kids. Sean was an outsider. He was not really a member of their church, and Jessica shouldn't be dating an outsider. But Jessica and Sean were in love by this point, and they were going to figure out a way to be together. They devised little plans to see each other secretly. In the evenings, Jessica would go out for a run. Sean would be parked at the end of their property, and Jessica would run down and meet him. Before she finally got a cell phone at the age of 23, she did have an iPad, and she would use that iPad to send Sean messages. But she would delete these messages so no one would figure out that she was still secretly meeting up. And Sean, by this point, knew that Toby was super controlling. That was obvious. But he had also become suspicious that there was some sort of abuse going on. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but he thought he had an idea. And so he started talking to Jessica about it. Very slowly, sometimes not even coming out and asking a specific question, but alluding to the fact that he knew something was up. And eventually Jessica opened up and told him. Without going into too much detail, she told him that she had been abused by her father. Then one day, one of the little kids was using Jessica's iPad, and they found some explicit photos that she had sent to Sean that she thought she deleted, but apparently she didn't. Once Toby found out about it, he completely lost it. He had the audacity to make Jessica feel dirty for sending photos to Sean, knowing full well that he had been taking inappropriate photos of his girls for years, since they were elementary age. And Jessica was forced to break up with Sean. They made her invite him over to the house and break up with him in front of everyone. After this, Jessica fell into a depression. She lost weight. She was having trouble focusing on anything, really. And this was all happening during the filming of the second season of the TLC show. But Sean was not giving up. He knew that Jessica was still under the control of her father, and he managed to slip Jessica some books about various topics that he thought might put some things into perspective for her. And it did. These were books about overcoming trauma and dealing with a narcissist. Jessica was starting to see her father for who he really was. Jessica and Sean started corresponding through letters because at this point her phone had been taken away. One of the TLC production assistants agreed to help them out, secretly exchanging letters between the two of them, which makes me wonder how much TLC knew. Did the filming crew not see any red flags here? At the point where a grown woman is having to secretly ask a production assistant if they would sneak a letter to someone for her, that's weird. So this goes on for a while, and then one day while they were on tour, Jessica walked in on her mother and one of her sisters having a conversation, and she could tell that this was a very serious conversation. And she found out that her dad had been abusing one of her younger sisters. And after this, she was just done. She went, told her dad that she was leaving. Now, Toby was in a panic because he knew that he was losing control over one of his children. If this one leaves, then will this one go? Will it be like a domino effect? And so he knew that he had to figure out a way to get Jessica to stay. So he did what he's best at, and he started to manipulate the situation. In front of the entire family, Toby basically put Jessica on like a religious trial. He accused her of walking away from God, and if she was walking away from God, that must mean that she is now serving the devil. He repeatedly asked her, "Who's your master? Who's your master?" over and over again. There are only two choices. You're either for God or you're for the devil. Whose side are you on? Some of the family members even started recording during this whole thing, and he just kept asking her repeatedly, "Who's your master?" Until finally Jessica just broke down and she said, "Satan. Satan is my master." You know, she said it sarcastically, but that's all Toby needed, because in that moment, in front of the whole family, Jessica became public enemy number one. She was the evil child. She was shunned from the other children. And now Toby had her on video admitting that she was evil. After that, Toby would have the other kids keep watch over Jessica to make sure she didn't try to leave. And if she did get caught trying, they would physically prevent her from leaving. The other kids would also randomly start recording her. Sometimes she would wake up and one of her siblings would be watching over her while she was asleep. She was completely trapped. She was a prisoner in that house. But then one day in April of 2016, Toby did something that gave Jessica the push to finally go. He beat Jessica with a belt for talking back to him, and she decided right then and there that this was enough. Like, she is just not dealing with this anymore, and she decided that she was leaving that day. Toby, of course, did not make this easy. It was an all-day argument, negotiation, just gaslighting session. He even threatened to sue her at one point. I mean, he was trying anything and everything he could think of to manipulate her into staying in that house. But Jessica did not back down. She was determined that she was going to leave that night. So just to save face, Toby told the other kids that he was making Jessica leave because she was evil. She was such a terrible influence. She was allowed to take her fiddle and a few changes of clothes, and that was it. She had to leave any other electronic devices and everything else. A couple of her siblings dropped her off at a cousin's house, and that was it. Jessica was finally out. This doesn't mean that she had it easy. It was a long road to recovery, but Jessica and Sean were finally able to be together. Sean's family treated her like their own. She started going to intensive therapy, and she was finally officially on the road to recovery. And she was inching towards a final goal of turning her father in for everything that he had done. But before she had a chance to do that, a few months after she had left the house, an ex-church member went to the church leaders and they told them that Toby Willis was abusing his daughters. This person was Mary's brother. Remember Mary, Jeremiah's ex-fiance? He came back in town for whatever reason, and he went to the church leaders and he told them what Toby had been doing. I don't know how Mary and her family knew for sure that Toby was doing this. Maybe Mary had seen something and she told her brother about it. I don't know, but somehow they knew. So he goes and tells the church leaders all that he knows. Thankfully, the church leaders did not try to handle the situation there within their church. That happens so often in these tight religious circles, and that's why so much abuse in churches goes unchecked. One of the church leaders knew a police officer personally, and so they called him over. They told him everything that was going on, and his immediate response was, "You have to report this like right now. You need to call and make an official report." So Mary's brother called the Department of Children's Services Abuse Hotline and filed a report, and that's what got the ball rolling. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, or TBI, got involved and they interviewed Jessica for hours. She went through everything in detail, every horrible, disgusting thing her father had done to her over the years. But before agents had the chance to make an arrest, Toby took off. He started hitchhiking and he made it all the way to Greenville, Kentucky before police finally caught up to him. Now, if you typically just listen to my videos and you don't actually watch them, I know a lot of you listen while you're working or doing chores. Just this once, I urge you to stop what you're doing and go look at your screen, because you need to see just how creepy this man looks. Now, let's do a comparison. This is the image Toby portrayed when he was on screen or at gigs with his children. But this is not the real Toby Willis. This face right here is the real Toby. This man is a monster. This has to be one of the most disturbing mugshots I've ever seen.
We developed information during the course of our investigation that led us to believe that he did not want to be found by law enforcement.
The TBI says Willis hitchhiked 115 miles last week from Shepherdsville, Kentucky to Greenville, Kentucky, and he accepted rides from at least 2 people. It's unclear why or how he got from his home in Ashland City to Shepherdsville. A spokesperson for TLC says the network did not renew the Willis family, and new episodes haven't aired since April. All social media presence for the family is gone, and the previous publicist that we reached out to had no comment.
Now, Toby ended up pleading guilty to the charges. He likely did this because he knew that if it went to court, the entire world would know all of the horrific details about what he had done to his children. In the end, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison, and he is required to serve 100% of that sentence with no chance of parole. school. So that means he won't get out until he's in his 80s, if he lives that long. Brenda and the kids took down all of their social media accounts after the news broke, and the band stopped playing for a couple of years just to give themselves a chance to try to heal and to process everything that they had been through.
When everything kind of came out in the open and became public knowledge with the abuse and stuff, we took 2 years out of the public eye, and we really tried to take that time to focus on ourselves and each other and to start the healing process. And we really didn't know right away if a music career would be possible for us. So we started writing music again, songs that were just kind of for ourselves, and it was almost a year later that we decided to come together and do this project.
They did get back together and started performing again. Jessica was no longer in the band though, but as far as I can tell, all the family seems to be on good terms. The girls finally had a chance to share their individual stories with each other, something that they never got to do when Toby was still around. Brenda divorced Toby a couple of years after he was arrested, and Jessica and Sean ended up getting married. She's making music as a solo artist now, and she seems to be doing really well.
Let's just dive in. You know, people saw you on TV. You were this beloved family, all these children doing what they love to do. What was really going on behind the scenes?
Well, there were a lot of toxic and unhealthy things that had been present for many years, ever since I was young. When I was really little, I didn't have words for that. I didn't necessarily know that anything was wrong, and then realizing something was wrong. It was really just maybe my body telling me or something was uncomfortable, but not having the clarity, not understanding. But it did get to the point where I was in my early 20s on TV performing with my family, and a lot of parts of it did really look quite good, but those unhealthy threads, so to speak, had stayed woven in that whole time, and it had really escalated. It got really bad. I'm pretty open about my dad was pretty much abusive in every way that a person can be. I went through childhood sexual abuse. It got really violent when I tried to get out. And you know, that's the story, although I was out talking and performing, like that's the story that I really needed to tell and didn't know how to. And in a way, my book is finally doing that. It's called Unspeakable, but the un's crossed out because like something changes when you actually speak that part of your story.
I highly recommend Jessica's book. It is extremely well written. I will leave a link in the description box if you're interested in checking that out. And I recommend the audiobook because Jessica is the narrator and she does a really great job. And it makes it so much more impactful knowing that you're hearing Jessica's words from her own mouth. She also has a YouTube channel where she uploads her music, so go check that out as well. Very talented, super inspirational person, and I hope she is living her best life. I hope everyone in this case is finally able to live their best lives. And that is all I have on this case. Let me know what you guys think about this one down in the comments. Don't forget to click the link in my description box or scan the QR code on the screen to download June's Journey for free. If you found this video interesting, please consider subscribing, liking this video, and leaving me a comment. That is the easiest way for you to help out me and my channel. And as always, I appreciate each and every one of you for watching, and I will see you next time.